My name's Christine Pike and I am the project coordinator and curator for the Husk of Hares touring exhibition project. A husk is an Old English term for a group of hares, and the hare was chosen for this first touring project because of its close associations, particularly with East Anglia, where this project will be touring to. Integral to the success of this project has been the involvement of the people of the East Anglia Fens. Work has been produced in creative writing workshops and photography workshops, and we have audio-visual presentations of work made by the people who live in the area of the Fens, and this has been absolutely crucial and an integral part of the project. In 2013, 3 venues have been selected for this project to tour to. The first is the Wisbech and Fenland Museum, and you will hear David Wright explaining a little bit about the museum and why he felt that this exhibition was such an exciting prospect for the museum to have. The second venue will be the March and District Museum, and the third will be the Babylon Gallery in Ely in Cambridgeshire. Hopefully we will have more venues planned for next year. 3 artists were selected to work on this project: Roger Coleman, Sue Welfare and John Wiltshire. One is a photographer, the second is a professional writer, and the third is a painter. And I would like to introduce you to them now, and they can talk to you about their work in their own words.
Hello, my name is David Wright. I'm the curator of Wisbech and Fenland Museum. And you now find yourself here inside the Hudson Room, which opened in 2000 and which is our temporary exhibition space. Now, those who are aware of the Fenland area are aware of the particular characteristic of the Fens, and what this exhibition attempts to do is to illustrate through the folklore associated with the hare particular aspects about the Fenland environment and its landscape. The hare particularly associated with this area, and how it has lived on through myth, folklore, and, as we know, the hare today. Yes, it is. This is an exhibition of contemporary art, using both photography, creative art, and, importantly, creative writing. The important thing is this is not just artists going out and actually taking photographs. It is involved the community through photography project, going out into the landscape, identifying characteristic things in the landscape that we all perhaps take too much for granted. Hares, which the nature of the landscape, that idea that you can travel in the Fens and sometimes not be able to make any purchase on the distance that you've actually travelled because it's so flat, that you may well travel for 20 minutes or so and thought, gosh, we don't seem to have got anywhere. Because of the flatness of the landscape, hares sitting on their haunches with their ears poking up will be very easy to sort of identify. We've got a hare in where I live in Lincolnshire. I saw him sort of loping down our drive yesterday. However, they aren't as prevalent as they perhaps were through various changes in habitat and changes to the local environment.
Hi, my name's Sue Welfare, and I'm a writer, and my involvement in the project has been to encourage other people to write about the hare and their life in Fenland. This has involved 2 long day workshops where we've taken people who perhaps haven't written since they've been at school and looked at ways of getting them to explore their creativity, talk about the hare, talk about the everyday experience. And that material that we've created is here today in the exhibition, used in all sorts of different forms. I wanted to become involved in this exhibition because I actually do come from Fenland, and I think this is an area which is vastly underrepresented in terms of creativity, and there's a great well of talent here that's not been tapped into. And so it was really nice to be asked to be involved in something that represents the place where I grew up, the place I'm passionate about, and in my everyday job, a place that I often write about. My special feeling about the hare, I've grown up with them. I've a rural childhood, and it kind of veers between being terribly excited to see something so wild and so kind of other, it's very different, the hare, to quite enjoying them in a pie or in a stew. So I have a fully rounded relationship with the hare. They also represent something of the strangeness and bleakness of the landscape. To see a hare in a wide, wild, open stubble field, or in spring wheat, it's particularly in March when there's more than one, it's quite an eerie and interesting experience. And they're also much larger than you expect. When you see a hare, you expect them to be a bit more like their sort of domestic rabbity friends, and actually they're enormous. I think they're really special, and certainly it was a really good focus for this project, because they evoke such a great response from people. Everybody has a feeling about hares. Last year we bought a puppy, a new puppy, and we went to pick him up, went to have a look at him actually in March, and we drove into a field in the middle of the fens, and my husband smokes, and we stopped for him so he could have a cigarette before we got there, and as you got your eye in, we saw 2 pairs of ears, and then as we looked there were more and more, and in this field there must have been probably 8 or 10 hares, and I have never ever seen that many hares in one place. My other experience of them is going into a shed as a small child and seeing them hung up dead and being devastated. That was my first real experience of death, was something that I was then going to eat, and it was making that correlation between the two things.
Christine Pike actually came to me during the Open Studios last year and was looking at the work and suggested that this project might be something I might be interested in. My first thoughts about the hare were to do with my own reactions to seeing them in the wild. I always think there's some significance attached to the hare when you see it in its natural environment. It's always a bit of a surprise when you do see them, if they're sitting on their form or anything like that in the environment. Then they do sit still for a long time, and you suddenly come upon them and then they explode, and it's a big surprise to see them in that state. But obviously also you quite often see them running in the fields, and I think a lot of people, I'm one of them, certainly attaches a significance to seeing an animal like that. I grew up in Sussex where there are no hares at all, or very rarely do you see anything like that. So coming into East Anglia 8 years ago, suddenly there's different habitats, different environments, different animals and creatures to be seen. For me, looking at the hare specifically, I initially wanted to do something based on that element of surprise that the hare has, and it fits in with the way that I've been working with oil paint over the last few years, looking at the spontaneity in the paint itself, and always trying to be aware of the reaction to a medium like that. Oil paint is a bit elusive at times, and you can often have a very good start and then ruin it very quickly. And I think the hare is a little bit, there's a surprise when you see it in the landscape, and so there's something joins up there for me. So that was my initial starting point. And from that I then looked at the various reference materials that there are around, and other artists obviously using the hare as a starting point. So Chardin and the Leaping Hare book specifically as well, George Ewart and David Thompson, George Ewart Heavens I think it is. And so with the stories, learning about the stories behind hares and the mythologies behind hares nationally and internationally, that was a massive revelation that it's such an important animal for mythology and symbology. So I found the whole process has been a big learning experience for me in terms of painting as well as the subject itself.
My name is Roger Coleman, and I'm the photographer working on this project. So what I've been trying to do is capture the, if you like, the big picture of the landscape, the Fenland area, and try and tease out those things that are special and particular about the Fens. I've lived in the Fens for most of my life, and both in Lincolnshire and around Cambridgeshire, so I'm very, very familiar with it all. And for people who live here, the Fens is it's very special and distinct landscape. People from outside the Fens can often find it difficult because what they see is just a huge empty space and nothingness. And for some people, that is quite scary. Me, I see it very differently. I see this as, in one sense, a huge roofless factory. It's intensely cultivated, this area. It's hugely productive. And it's been drained over the years in order to facilitate this. So it's dominated by a sort of geometry of drains and roads, right-angle bends and things like that. And then protruding up out of the landscape, we have the pylons that march across it from the south right up to the north. And then we have this more recent crop of wind farms. So you see these things in the distance, and of course as you get closer to Ely Cathedral, the wonderful ship of the Fens, you have Ely in the distance. So making that work as a landscape is not a normal photography project, because it's not in the least picturesque. It's very demanding and it's very empty. And what I've tried to do here is create some very wide panoramas and run things together in straight lines to give people a sense of the visual reality of the Fens, and then to try and move in to a closer scale to see some of the detail, because actually, and I do a lot of work in this area. I've mapped it and surveyed it, and I do a lot of that by bike. So I cycle around on my bicycle, which is a good pace to work all these things out at, and you get used to the landscape and the way the light travels across it. And so I've tried to move into the closer sort of perspective that you get doing that. And then also I've tried to tease out a theme which I've called postcards from the Fens. So that's trying to find things that are very typical of the area. And the Fens is not, as I said, it's not picturesque in any way. So from most people's point of view, it doesn't justify a set of postcards which we associate with going on holiday and tourist venues and things like that. But I've tried to do a set of postcards which tease out very particular characteristic things of the Fens, and as part of the show we're asking people to write a message from the Fens, to think about some particular incident, some memory, and write a message to somebody else about something they remember from the Fens. So not just creating the visual images for postcards, but trying to involve people in the idea of sending postcards from this area to outside and telling people about it. And to encourage that, I've done front and backs for these postcards, and I've put stamps from different eras on them, and I've rendered some of the postcards in black and white. I'm hoping we get some more recent memories, but also people talking about the Fens as it was in the early days, because there's been huge change here over the last 30, 40 years, massive change. And in fact, going back to the Second World War, at that time the Fens became crucially important to the country's survival, basically, as a place to grow food and trying to feed the country. And a lot of change stems from that area. So older people still have memories of what the Fens was like beforehand, which is a picture of a somewhat more stable and distant past, and very different to what we have now, because there's not that long ago the rivers were the main transport routes through the Fens, and now we have lorries tearing down roads carrying massive loads to the supermarkets around the country. So huge changes, and I've tried to tap into some of that. The other thing that I've been doing is working with young photographers, and with them I've been trying to get them to take a different, closer view than they normally would. Yeah, young photographers are interested in taking photographs and not necessarily thinking about what you might do with the images. And actually, so what we have is a video, a short film that has been put together from the work of 3 of these young photographers, where we've gone to a huge farm, Coleman farm, which is one of the co-op farms. So it's actually a very interesting centre because it's part of a movement within the co-op to try and encourage young people to go out into the countryside and see how their food is grown and understand more about it. So it is an educational centre as well as being a very big working farm. So we went out there, spent a few hours there, and I asked them to look for all the details and things which have an abstract interest. So not necessarily focusing on the subject matter, potatoes in boxes, but thinking how you might use that as something abstract, but also carries the meaning of what it is as well. And then they've collaged together video from that, which treats these subjects at a very close-up level and in an abstracted way. So really we've got 4 different ways of looking at the area, and this has been really an exploration of how to see the fens, rather than trying to produce beautiful photographs of the fens, which is really not a sort of impossible activity, but not what the fens demand. They demand a much more realistic approach where you accept them as they are. And there's a wonderful expression that people in the fens have when they're saying that something actually is the way it is. They simply say, "that is." And I wanted to capture the "that is" of the fens, just the way they are.